right, guys, it's Thursday night, August 20th, 2020 already. This is Tim O'Connor, New York State Senate District candidate for District 51, the heart, the breadbasket, the Rust Belt of upstate New York. Guys, as you know, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's courage to continue that counts. And guys, one of the guys that really has impressed me, got me motivated, got me talking with you guys about things like vitamin D. It's Dr. Mark Braiman, okay? And he's here with me tonight. Just had a successful performance at one of the first open air deals. Let's start with that. Let's let everybody get to know who you are.
Okay, you surprised me a little. So
I know, through curveball.
The organization called Syracuse Shakespeare in the Park, which has put on summertime shows in Thorndon Park in Syracuse and wintertime shows indoors at a variety of venues. Many of them Shakespeare. Well, we put on the first live action play, the first live action drama performance of any sort in Syracuse since, actually in all of central New York, since March. And it was Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. I played the role of Don Pedro, the prince, and we had a lot of fun. That we had about 150 people in Thorndon Park, socially distancing every night for our 6 performances. Actually, 4 of them were in the evenings, and 2 of them were on Sunday afternoons. And it was madly successful. There were people lining up, not allowed to enter the park because it would have made for too many people, and they lined up around the wrought iron fence surrounding the amphitheater in the park and listened from outside. So it was a really exciting. Oh, looks like somebody else is wearing a different kind of mask.
That's right.
Those masks look a little like the one I wore as Don Pedro during the masquerade ball scene.
All right, guys, we got to remember when we do these live performances, the comments, the shares, the questions, all of those things help us get this message out. So, guys, you've heard me talk about vitamin D. Basically, right from the start, this guy and I were trying to figure out ways around this potential danger of COVID. Not potential danger; it's a real danger. It's a real disease. But one of the things that we've found, and Dr. Mark, I want you to talk about it if you don't mind, but this vitamin D thing, there's a connection, right?
Yeah, well, people started noticing this actually quite early on. I was one of the first people to actually publish a paper in a scientific journal to state the hypothesis that vitamin D doesn't so much protect people from catching the virus as it does help people survive once they have caught it. There are all kinds of amazing statistics. Like if you look at Singapore, for example, they're about as big as Manhattan in terms of geographic area, and they have a population about as big as 2 boroughs of New York City. They have more COVID cases than New York City, or more COVID cases than Manhattan, something like 50,000 cases now, and only 29 deaths. So wow. How does that compare to Manhattan with 20,000 or so deaths?
Right.
10 or 20,000 deaths. The thing that has always bothered me is the apparent lack of curiosity in people like Anthony Fauci from the CDC and many public health experts in the U.S. The lack of apparent lack of curiosity in explaining why Singapore is doing so much better. I've heard infectious disease specialists say, well, it isn't entirely vitamin D. I mean, Singapore is on the equator. Yes, its residents get a lot more sunshine year round because the sun is always high in the sky at noon. It's always warm, but not so warm as to be uncomfortable and push people indoors into air conditioning. It's a gorgeous place. I actually have a first cousin who lives there, works for Bloomberg News down there. And so I've visited him there in the year 2000. And it's a beautiful place, but they thought at first that they didn't have any caseload, and then it turned out that some of their immigrant workers were bringing it in. and they got really embarrassed because they were boasting about how low their caseload was. Well, it turns out their caseload shot through the roof, but their number of deaths still did not. And American scientists have not really explained very well why that is. As I was starting to say, there are some people who say, well, Singapore compared to New York City has a much lower obesity rate. But if you actually look up the numbers, the number of people in Singapore, first of all, New York City has one of the lower obesity rates of any place in the United States, because people don't get in their cars very much. They walk everywhere, and so the rate of obesity in Singapore is only about half of what it is in New York City. It's something like 12% for Singapore and 24% for New York City. So that doesn't explain why there's 100-fold lower death rate from COVID. I mean, the death rate from COVID, the case mortality rate, if you take the number of reported cases and put it in the denominator and put the number of deaths due to COVID in the numerator, in New York City, it's a couple percent, 1 to 2%. Actually, it's closer to 5% because they stopped being able to measure all the cases that they had. But in Singapore, it's down in the range of 0.2% or less. I'm sorry, 0.06%. So less than 1 out of 1,000. 1 out of every 2,000 people who has gotten measured with a confirmed case of COVID in Singapore.
Yeah.
Only like 1 out of 2 to 3,000 has died from it. Why is that?
Why is that?
And why can't we achieve that in the United States? If we were to achieve that, COVID would be like no more than a flu. I mean, that's less than the case mortality rate for flu in a typical year in the US.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do we need to do to achieve that? If we need to lose weight, why aren't the people in the Centers for Disease Control telling everybody, go out and lose weight? You won't die from COVID. I mean, why are we shutting down everything instead of just telling people, you can control this? It's under your individual control. It's not everybody else's responsibility to stop transmitting this disease to you. It's your responsibility to give yourself a chance to survive it.
I love that. Andrew says something here that if he was elected president, as you've probably met Andrew through one of our podcasts at the Libertarian Coalition, if he was elected to presidency, he would make you Secretary of Education. You're knowledgeable, articulate, honest, and dedicated. And he just described the Libertarian Party. But what I want to point out here is you might actually be qualified for that job, right? Like, why don't you tell everybody what your history is, how you got here, what you've done as a career, and those sort of things. I think it's important to go into your credentials here.
So I graduated in 1977 from Harvard University.
Did you say Harvard?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew.
Chemistry major. I actually graduated summa cum laude.
Okay.
I started the same year as several interesting people. My freshman year. I'm much less accomplished. So Tim wants to say that I'm accomplished. I'm a professor at Syracuse University, professor of chemistry. But that freshman class that I was in, you look at some of the people. Like the best known person in my freshman class was Bill Gates. The second best known was John Roberts, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Third best.
So your peer group, at the very least, is incredibly accomplished. And certainly you've been successful as well. So Denise asked a great question here. We were talking Singapore, and she's wondering it because they had a history with the original SARS virus. If they perhaps were better prepared, and I think what you and I are leaning towards is that perhaps their vitamin D and their overall health has helped them. Would that be?
Well, there's a lot of indication that the people in the Far East all started masking much more quickly because they had experience with SARS, and that makes sense, okay. And as far as the rate of spread early on was very favorable in places like Singapore and Korea, but even even those places that got a quick handle on the spread of COVID are finding that they're getting very different results now, depending on where exactly they're located in terms of the latitude. So this was what I pointed out originally: is that you know, if you average all the countries in certain latitudes together, you can sort of reduce some of this dependence on you know, how, on whether they had the experience with SARS. So you can sort of you know, if you mix in places like Ethiopia and whatever on the equator and Ecuador, you're still getting quite a variation in their experiences, but overall you have the advantage of averaging a large number of cases, a large number of countries. And if you do that, there's still, you know, 10 to 15 fold differences in the case mortality rates that were showing up in March. And that's what I originally published. And now, you know, basically all that did was suggest that people ought to do more careful studies. Okay.
Yeah.
All I really said was that's not a really strong scientific evidence for anything. But what it does is it suggests a hypothesis. And what we scientists use to call good hypotheses is the word falsifiable, which means you can suggest an experiment which could easily prove the hypothesis incorrect. And the experiment that needed to be done was to measure vitamin D levels in COVID patients and see how closely those vitamin D levels, whether they correlated with death rates.
Yeah.
That was done fairly early on in April in several Asian countries, in Indonesia and Philippines especially.
Yeah.
And they already saw differences. I mean, one study claimed that there was a 50% decrease in the death rate for people who were vitamin D sufficient as compared to people who were vitamin D deficient. Another study said it was a 90% improvement in survival rate for people who were vitamin D sufficient as compared to people who were vitamin D deficient. Now, in the United States, there's really only been one study that had a very small number of cases so far published. The National Institutes of Health has started in mid-April. They started a study, but they haven't published the results of those yet. They supposedly, I think that study just ended in mid-August. So we will be hearing this. Hopefully once those numbers are published, our public health experts will start to rely on them a little bit more firmly.
So let me go in a direction here for you. As a somewhat knowledgeable statistics guy, that the economics classes I took relied heavily on statistics. So one of the issues that I ran across was in Indonesia, there's a styling issue of people wearing sunblock because they want to lighten their skin. And so intuitively what happened there, not intuitively, we can infer from that behavior that there is probably a vitamin D deficiency, right? And didn't we see a population in Indonesia where COVID just ravaged them? And it was an unusual population. It was females in Indonesia guys, this is a real statistic. Females are more successful with COVID than males are. This disease discriminates on a couple different levels, okay? So what we saw was this abnormality or even an anomaly where a large population of women got COVID and got really sick. And doesn't that suggest what we're saying here?
Well, all of these things are suggestive, and none of them is really prove well. Okay, the direct experiment is the one that you really need to do to prove it. You need to measure people's vitamin D levels and see how well it predicts whether or not they survive. And you know, there's a lot of these things, but I mean, it was starting to be very suggestive early on. If you look at the main risk factors for death from COVID are, you know, dark skin, advanced age, obesity, and those are the same three risk factors that are the top risk factors for predicting vitamin D deficiency in the United States.
But that's just a coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the problem, is it could be a coincidence. It's unlikely, but it could be. You don't get the scientific hard proof until you do the really properly controlled experiment, and that's what doctors want to do. The other problem that I've heard from healthcare worker, a specific healthcare worker who comes into contact with those high risk populations, and I think this, to me, rings truer than any other explanation I've heard for why the doctors haven't been pushing vitamin D, is because they really have no mechanism to pay for it for these patients, especially these poor elderly patients. Because vitamin D is not covered by Medicaid. You can't, a doctor can't prescribe, most of the time, can't prescribe vitamin D unless they have a severe deficiency.
Yeah.
So if somebody walks into their office, okay, for a checkup, they can say, well, you should go get some vitamin D, but they have no way of really helping that patient to get the vitamin D. That patient can't use Medicaid to go purchase those vitamin D bottles that you have in the back of your behind you on your shelf. They can't. They have no way of doing that, and you can't use food stamps either. What do you call it? The SNAP benefits. You can't use those to purchase vitamins, okay, or other health supplements. Well, it is and it isn't crazy. I mean, as someone I taught nutrition as part of a human biochemistry class at the University of Virginia for 3 years when I was on there. One of your commenters, Denise Whitney, says you can get it via diet.
Yes.
The answer is yes, you can, but many people who are in a situation of not having vitamin D are also in a situation of not having access to those diet-rich foods, which are things like salmon and other fish, fish oils. The amount of vitamin D supplementation in milk and orange juice is pretty low right now. So if I were making a recommendation to public health authorities, it actually might be to boost the level of vitamin D supplementation in milk, but especially for the elderly population, to boost it in orange juice. I happen to drink a lot of orange juice that has calcium and vitamin D added to it, but the numbers are not very high for how much vitamin D.
Well, let's talk about Denise's comment here too. She says we should all stock up on vitamin D. Now, you and I, about a month and a half ago, had a conversation, and as you guys can see, right behind here, I am literally stocking up on vitamin D. I'm not hoarding it. I am collecting it. Every time I go to the store, I grab a bottle, because I can afford it. And because I want to have enough for people that may, in fact, need it. Would you like to talk about steps you took in that direction?
Well, so I actually just purchased a 36 bottles of vitamin D from a supplier. Each one of those bottles contains 240 gel caps, and each of those gel caps contains 5,000 units. Now, 5,000 units a day is a good amount for someone who would be at high risk to be taking. Most people don't need that, but people who are at high risk for COVID illness and death, people in nursing homes and the like, they should really be getting supplemented, in my opinion, 5,000 units a day. I don't know why why that hasn't been recommended yet by the people running the CDC and the National Institutes of Health. Why it bothers me that there hasn't been a recommendation yet for those institutions to start feeding their patients
let me go crazy libertarian on you, okay? Because what we've seen, and not crazy libertarian, okay? Just follow this through. I am very much against the way news gets presented, okay? And it constantly gets used to manipulate people, to terrify them. So one of the things when we were talking about vitamin D is I suspect that come October, come that certain time of the year where the media gets even more desperate for attention from everybody, they're going to all of a sudden start talking about vitamin D just the way that you and I have been talking about it for months now. And so that's going to stimulate a buying panic, and that's going to stimulate these things that they can then blame on someone other than the fact that our elected officials didn't hire great officials who would tell the truth about things like vitamin D and make good recommendations and say, hey, let's lose a little bit of weight while we have the weather. Let's do some things that are really good for us, because that does seem to help fight COVID.
Yep. A lot of things. I think one of the things that we should recognize, and this also worries me, is that the reason that they don't want to make this recommendation might be that they don't think that or they think that people will stop doing social distancing and mask wearing if they think they can be protected with vitamin D. And I want to make sure that nobody misinterprets my opinion. Right. My opinion is mask wearing is still a great idea. I know that libertarians don't like to wear masks because they're told they have to. And so I actually went out and I spent $3,000 to make sure that there were masks that were available for the Libertarian National Convention. And I designed these myself. They're spent awesome. $3,000 to print up 1,000 of them so that there would be plenty of them for the people at the Libertarian National Convention and at our state convention. And
guys, I'm using them to raise money. If you make a donation, I can mail you some masks. Dr. Mark has shared a big bag with me. And also, guys, honestly, if you like, you share, if you support me, if you show up and make comments and you want a mask, I will mail you a mask, period. It doesn't have to be about money. I'm joking around. Donations do help. Donations do help what I'm trying to do, but likes, shares, comments, which we're also getting tonight, and I really appreciate those. That's how we're going to spread this libertarian message, this message of liberty, this message of intellectually being able to deal with our own reality without bad parenting from a angry government, that they're angry with each other, they're angry with themselves, and all they seek to do is increase their power. Like Coke versus Pepsi, back in the day, they used to fight and fight and fight. And guys, that's why I drink RC Cola, man. It's the cola of the third party, and it's a better way to go. We take a step back. We're not building power based on getting you guys to argue. We're trying to inform ourselves and each other and trust each other once again. There used to be a time where I feel like society used to trust each other and better than they are now.
So Ryan, I see Ryan Bedford is asking a question about zinc. And I have heard this suggestion before, but I don't really know of any scientific studies or any published data that strongly supports the value of taking zinc supplements. I don't want to say don't bother, but I don't see any evidence that it's nearly as important as the vitamin D. I hear some people say vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin zinc, but it's not just scattershot. You can't just sort of like stuff every possible supplement into you. This is another good point. Milk.
Ryan is great, man. He's a libertarian evangelist.
It really depends. Some people have the gene to digest milk after adolescence. I certainly can't drink milk at all. So the vitamin D supplemented milk doesn't do me any good. And I think that is generally true for African Americans, especially, that you won't convince most elderly African Americans to get vitamin D supplementation via milk. The better chance, I think, is with orange juice. One of my black friends says that his family is all drinking Sunny D, which is a pretty artificial drink, in my opinion, but it's got lots of vitamin D in it, from what I understand, or it's got about 500 units per serving. That's still less than what's ideal, I think, for the people who are at high risk. They should be taking a supplement of about 5,000 units a day. From what I've been able to tell. Ryan says no mandates. No, I would never support any mandate handing people vitamin D and telling them that they have to eat it, or that they have to make their kids eat it.
He's talking about the masks. So That's where he's at, and I'm with him on that. I don't agree with mandates. But you can convince me to wear a mask, right? Or at least out of respect for people who especially might get fined if I don't wear a mask, I wear a mask. I don't always wear a mask, but for respect to protect a micro business, I wear a mask. Period.
I'm in favor of creating an incentive for people to wear masks independent of what government tells them to do. And for me, one incentive, especially for libertarians, was to advertise the importance of voting libertarian in 2020 to be able to free. Now, Denise makes a very good point. Tanning in the winter to raise vitamin D levels. I actually have been sitting under a sun lamp during the winter for over 50 years because I have psoriasis. So I have probably spent more than 2,000 or 3,000 hours of my life sitting under a sun lamp with no sunscreen at all, of course. And during the summer, I go out, not right in the middle of the day usually, but I swim. I do 2-mile swims and funny. That's an interesting. I can do 36-mile round trip bike rides to and from work.
Wow.
And that gets me a lot of vitamin D in the summer. And I try to avoid wearing sunscreen during the summer when I'm doing those. I avoid when the sun is highest in the sky between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. or so. But it's the best thing on earth is that we live in New York State where people can get out in the summer and get that sun. But that's going to start disappearing. I mean, I'm really worried what's going to happen when the lake effect clouds pull their veil over upstate New York. Come late September through October, the rate of vitamin D synthesis in people's skin is going to plummet like a rock. That worries me, that death rates are going to go up very fast after that.
I'm afraid, and I'm afraid that our virus avoidance strategy has actually forced us into a position that looks like a disaster based on the statistical spread of COVID, that it's going to come back to upstate New York because we didn't achieve anything near herd immunity. And so now keeping kids out of schools and putting it off till November. And like you're saying, the rates of vitamin D synthesis going down in September and October. I'm a little bit afraid that we set ourselves up for a disaster. And I'm a big fan of making fun of Cuomo. And honest to God, I don't think he has anybody helping him make good decisions. So those are my concerns. What do you think? Do you want to help me allay my fears, or do you want to expand on them?
So this is a little bit of a gamble. No matter what we did, it was a gamble. I have talked about this a lot with my sister and brother-in-law who are involved in an infectious diseases practice in Lexington, Kentucky, about whether or not we should have told people, mix together but get plenty of vitamin D in the summer. You may get sick, but you will protect yourself like getting a vaccine with a live virus if you get yourself mildly sick during the summer. And my sister and her husband are, got very, very huffy with me and angry. And I tried to bring up this point that I read this several years ago, that the engineers and ship captains who analyzed what happened with the Titanic, they say that, obviously they should have been going slower. But once the watch spotted the iceberg, that at that moment, the best decision would have been not to steer the Titanic at all, to let it go head on into the iceberg.
Right.
Because while more people would have died in the initial crash, far more people would have survived overall, because only the front compartment would have flooded and not every compartment, and the boat would have survived. And they have an example of a ship that actually did that, rammed head on into an iceberg, and they were able to salvage the boat, and everybody almost everybody on board survived.
Yeah.
And
Let me.
and so I say, if I was that watchman on the Titanic, I think I would have decided not to tell the captain that we were heading for the iceberg.
Now
Now,
that's funny. I have an analogy that's similar, slightly different though. We're like in New York State. We're driving right at the iceberg, and all we're left to do is rearrange the deck chairs. Whereas there's no other than there's no sense of avoidance. We can see it coming. We've seen it coming for a million miles, and they're like, "Oh, just go rearrange deck chairs. Just go sit at home and watch TV." Here's a shout out: roofers get the vitamin D. As I used to do roofing, I I have a pretty good amount of color to my skin. I used to be like my pigment was out of this world. But yes, you guys get vitamin D. You're probably, no, I shouldn't say it. I was going to make a joke. I don't know if you're immune to COVID and you guys got to take your own comorbidities into account. But yes, getting a lot of sun is helpful.
I
For
I have
sure.
actually done some roofing. My son and I, he ripped the roof off of his 1920s house. It had 5 layers of shingles on it that had never been pulled off. And about 8 years ago, we pulled off all that and put on a new roof. And I did a lot of shingling with him, so I know that it was. That yes, roofers get a lot of vitamin D. I
Yes.
have also heard from the farmers at the Cazenovia Farmers Market that they have, among them, not heard of anybody who farms who has gotten ill from COVID.
I believe it. I believe it. I lived on a farm. I never got sick when I lived on a farm. Never. We would be out in the sun all day long, every day, and then even all weekend long during the winter. And we very rarely got sick. The only times I got sick was when I knew there was a TV show that I wanted to watch, or I just didn't want to go to school, right? Like, I'm sick. It was never a real, like, I don't think I was ever really sick when I lived on a farm. So we got to change the subject. We got to bore you guys for a minute, all right? But we still need likes, shares, questions, and comments. And we don't got to bore you. But Dr. Mark, one of the things that impressed me about him as I met him and as I got to know him has explained something to me that I want everyone to understand, at least intuitively. New York State is constitutionally district in error. Like it literally breaks the law, the New York State Constitution. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the New York State Constitution says very clearly that counties cannot be broken up in the formation of assembly districts or state senate districts. And that is very problematic because what happened was the Constitution also prescribed a certain method for drawing state senate and assembly districts, which for many centuries favored upstate, made the number of people per senate district much smaller in upstate than in Manhattan and Brooklyn and the downstate in New York City. And eventually, in the late 1950s, this was happening not just in New York State, but in lots of other states. The rural, let's say the urban populations of those states said that this was very unfair to them, and that they weren't getting adequate representation. And they took the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said that those provisions in state constitutions that require one county, one assemblyman, the way every U.S. Senate, every state has 2 U.S. senators. Basically, they said that that's a violation of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to do it in state districts. But they said they couldn't undo what was going on in the U.S. Senate because that was a separate provision of the U.S.
Yeah, they politicized the ruling for sure.
Well, they played a tricky tiptoeing through the tulips. But anyway, the Democrats in New York sort of took that idea and ran with it. And they didn't just redraw Senate districts where they absolutely had to comply with that. They redrew every state Senate district. They decided that they didn't have to do that even with state Senate districts that would have been perfectly matched to the size of a county. They still divvied up the counties and drew really bizarre gerrymandered lines.
Yeah.
So this is the problem, is that over half of the state Senate districts in New York State have this violation of the law, of the Constitution, and involve counties that have been divvied up. And it's very unfair, particularly to the small small counties of upstate New York. Tim, in particular, is running in a New York State Senate district that runs through, I think, what is it, 9 counties or 7, or I can't remember.
It's at least 9. And it's broken up. I have 3 full counties, and then like little slices of a bunch of other counties, and it's incredibly confusing. People ask me if they're in my Senate district. We have to go search it out, and we're trying to figure that out. It's kind of a train wreck, and then we don't get to synthesize views, right? We don't get to synthesize views with a population center to an agricultural center, as in a way I think would be better. Okay, so what we have is a primarily rural agricultural community, and literally gerrymandered to reflect that. We have some small towns with small colleges, but no big towns with big colleges, and they would be reachable if we just redrew things a little bit.
The biggest problem with this process, in my opinion, is that it means that the state government never responds to the small county governments upstate. That those small county governments have been buckling under the force of mandates that require them to spend money on certain things, that and if they want to try to get out from under those mandates, the route that they would need to take is to try to influence the state legislature. Well, they've basically had their legs cut off in terms of being able to influence the state legislature, because they don't have, a politician. They don't have a politician that's dependent on their support from a Ryan Bedford says it's obviously set up to confuse the masses, and that is true. Certainly, that's part of it. But it makes it, in particular, it disconnects the representation of the counties in this from the state legislature. So it means that the counties don't really have a voice, especially the small counties have no voice in the state legislature. And those mandated spendings come down, and then the counties are forced to spend something like 70 to 80% of the tax money that they pull in is spent on things that the legislature mandates for them to spend on.
And that doesn't
it's never going to change. So we only get to redistrict once every 10 years. So my point has been that, it's a tough point to get across to people, because it's only brought up roughly every 10 years. But if we can raise the alarm, raise the alert that we need to do something about it this time, otherwise, we're going to go another 10 years without effective representation in state government.
I'm pretty savvy, and I think I'm pretty savvy. I think I'm pretty quick on the uptake. It literally took me an hour or so to digest of a direct conversation with you to digest exactly what you were talking about. And guys, if you have questions about it, I understand it well enough that I can point out how important it is that we can't synthesize our views, that we're not being represented. And guys, all over upstate New York, the best representation we've got in the last 2 months was Rand Paul saying Cuomo should be impeached for his nursing home deal. That's the best. And now you can see some people in upstate New York, even Democrats, are trying to pick up the torch. And because they granted Cuomo X amount of power that was way too much, they're going to have a hard time doing it, man. See, Bedford, I'm going to be Larry's co-governor, man. Come on now. No, I would endorse Dr. Mark for that position for sure. He's brilliant.
I've thought of things. The impossible dream. I'll confess, my idea for impossible dream is running against Chuck Schumer for the Senate in 2022.
I love that. I love that.
Dream. But anyway,
I'd like to have a libertarian primary, 3 or 4 guys. Well, not guys. Excuse me, guys. I have pejorative, whatever. I apologize for that. It is a force of habit. But I would like to have 3 or 4 libertarians primary off for the spot to run against Chuck Schumer and to run against Kirsten Gillibrand, because we are based in our locale somehow. Like we could communicate to our local area, and then if we primary off with good intentions, we could actually get some interest statewide in the eventual Libertarian nominee, and that might be fun if we do it right, we do it politely, and I think we would. So I am kind of got my mind on that possibility of us primarying off and getting someone very interesting to run against Chuck Schumer, very interesting to run against Kirsten Gillibrand. I think that would be a fantastic thing. So guys, we introduced you to the constitutional redistricting thing, but I want you guys.
May I add one thing? If
Please.
you have any questions about this and want to see a demonstration of how I think we should have districted in 2011, you can go to my webpage, markbraiman.com. Very easy, markbraiman.com.
Hang on, I'm going to put it right up on the screen for these guys.
One of the tabs.
Did I spell your name right this time?
Yes, you did.
All right, good. It's really that simple, guys. It's there. When I figure out how to do screen shares, I got to get a upgrade on my computer because my hard drive is not quite adequate.
It's one of the tabs. It's one of the tabs behind that. But
yeah, I will do better at showing these things off. One of the things now, and we like to cover 3 subjects, and we're getting close to the amount of time, so I want to get this one out there. There are some laws in the New York State Assembly that are absolutely dystopian, terrifying nonsense. But then there's another issue of we're going back to COVID, but we're going back to New York State law and how it applies to COVID and this mandated vaccine concept and how we as libertarians, Dr. Mark and I don't really differ. Vaccines have risk, therefore they need consent. It's an actual medical procedure. Dr. Mark is pro-vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. Okay, these are personal choices that we should have the rights to make. Dr. Mark, why don't we tell a little bit? I think you actually signed up for something, didn't you? To talk to these people about that.
I have signed up for the one of the COVID vaccines. I haven't gone all the way through the screening process, so I haven't actually received a dose of anything. But I did this before. I did this 12 years ago with the not Gardasil. What do you call it? The shingles vaccine, the first shingles vaccine.
Okay.
I did the phase 3 trial for that for people above the age of 50. It had already been approved for people above the age of 60. I'm now 63. You
look good for 63, brother.
Yeah, I was 51 or so when this trial was going on, and I decided to do the trial, and because my aunt, my father's sister, had a very bad case of shingles when she was in her 60s. So I did that. I got the vaccine, and it turns out afterwards that I was in the group that got the vaccine. I didn't know for several years.
Because of double-blind study,
because of randomized. But it was unblinded afterwards, and I was told that I had the vaccine. You know, the interesting thing is, I did end up getting shingles at the age of about 60. So but I was told by my doctor that I probably had one of the mildest cases of shingles that they had ever seen. I was actually able to perform in an opera. I was in the Syracuse opera production of Rigoletto while I had shingles, and I was told that I would never have been able to do that if I was a typical case of shingles. Mm-hmm. I had minor pain and some itching, but nothing that was so debilitating as to keep me from being able to rehearse and perform. I feel so. It's interesting because this debate sort of parallels one that has happened in my family. My father always refused to get the flu vaccine, and he was a doctor. He was a psychiatrist. He went to medical school, graduated from Downstate Medical College in 1950 or so, and he refused year after year to get the flu vaccine because he said a couple times he got it and it made him feel sick. Well, this produced a gigantic feud in my family because my younger sister, a year younger than me, and her husband run an infectious diseases practice in Lexington, Kentucky. And my sister's a nurse, and her husband is the doctor. And they just, insist on trying to get as many people to get.
Andrew, well played.
Yeah. My sister and my father got in gigantic arguments about this. She claimed to be just totally worried about him dying of flu and pneumonia and this and that, and they would just get in gigantic arguments about who knew more about what was good for my father's health. So I am not of the opinion that vaccines are a way for the government to track people, but I do think people have the right to decide whether they want for themselves. I loved my father, and he lived to age 92 just fine. And if I'm so lucky as to live as old as my father, I won't be particularly upset.
Right.
So, people should have the right to say, this is what's good for me. I don't care what the statistics of the studies say. I can do what I want to do. At the same time, I do get a flu vaccine every year.
Yeah.
And I would get one this year, regardless of whether or not there is a law. But I don't think there should be a law. I don't think
there shouldn't. I just can't see where there's risk, there has to be consent. And like it or not, there's risks associated with vaccines. Now, I don't take vaccines regularly, but like I said, I'm very active. I'm outside a lot. And I haven't had an experience of getting sick where I think that a vaccine would keep me from getting sick. I've had the flu a couple times. That's very minor experience for me. But as I get older, I can see where at some point, and again, I believe in the science of vaccines. I think it works. I think introducing a weakened virus to your system makes sense. Okay, that your T cells then can learn how to beat it. You develop antibodies. So I understand the science. I appreciate the science. And as I get older, I may start taking more flu vaccines and stuff like that. But right now, it's one more year at least before I go down with this. Start buying into them.
I grew up at the time when I was born maybe just a year after the Salk polio vaccine was invented.
Yes,
and I knew a kid just 4 or 5 years older than me who lived up the street who had polio, and he walked around with a withered arm. And that made a strong impression on me as a little kid.
No doubt about it. Vaccines changed the world. They did. They made the world a better place. They did away with a lot of stuff. So
I'm generally supportive of the attempt. The FDA is overall quite careful to make sure that there's an enormous amount of benefit for a vaccine before they approve it. They're not likely to approve a vaccine that has only minor benefits.
Yeah, can I just say that what I think people are seeing is that we've politicized everything. We've gotten to where we can literally see the FDA getting involved in almost not the FDA, but the governing officials that can influence the FDA are selling regulations that they then want the FDA to enforce. And so I think that these things have been politicized, almost weaponized, really. And I think people can see that. And then when we get in bed with a Bill Gates, let's say you're the guy you went the freshman year at Harvard with, okay? This guy literally buys political favors to prop himself up. There's been reports of him releasing a dangerous vaccine in I want to say India, or at least sponsoring a dangerous vaccine in India. And I don't know if that stuff's accurate, but I do feel as though those stories have some validity. So people get nervous about stuff like that, and I completely understand that. Yes, Robert Forrest. Guys, Robert Forrest, SaveTheForestFarm.com, great guy. And yes, it's not just a prop. They're full, man. When it comes November, December, and I know I'm not making as much vitamin D as I want, I'm taking vitamin D. And I take a little every once in a while. I take it now anyway. Hence his throat, sir. Yeah, that could be. Guys, we're getting out to about the time I like to end these things. But I think, first of all, did you enjoy Dr. Mark? I enjoyed talking to Dr. Mark. I always have. and I'm sure that we're going to continue this in the future because it's important. He's
Ryan. Yeah. The first time I heard that nickname was from like one of my classmates in like 8th grade. Well, actually, she said when we graduated and she signed my yearbook, she said that way back in 8th grade when we met, she thought that was my name. Was Braiman.
But Bedford is he's like a wordsmith. He's a craftsman when it comes to making slogans and stuff like that. And he does it all the time. He's great. He helped me expand my knowledge of the Coke versus Pepsi and the RC Cola thing. We've had an absolute blast.
Mr. Bedford, you didn't come up with this.
That's right.
I came up with this. Breathe free again.
Yes. And guys, we do stand with Robert Forst. Bottom line, he had an unpopular political opinion and Otsego County took his property. Period. That's what happened. That's reality. He was 1 year in REM, and so technically they followed due process, but the bottom line was they were concerned because he was pro something and they were anti that something. And he wants to save that story for himself, and that's fine. But I know what it was, Robert. You know I know, and it's – oh, yeah, you know what I did? I meant to give Dr. Mark Barretto. Did I tell you about that? Did you – Dr. Mark is a guy who found a hole in the system and now has reinvented your general practitioner, right? It's basically $100 a month. You have unlimited access to a general practitioner. And he's located right down in Otsego. He's a wonderful guy. He was on the show. And guys, hopefully Dr. Mark and I get as many views as Dr. Mark Barretto and I got because, man, that was epic. He's certified in drug treatment. He's certified. So he'll basically go to your house for 2 chickens and remove a mole. Like that's the kind of deal he's working. He's a great guy.
Or 2 moles and he'll remove a chicken.
He said maybe a goat for mole removal. He wasn't quite sure where he was. You're welcome, Robert Forst. My pleasure. Todd the Bod and I have some ideas in mind. We're working on some stuff, Tommy. Hang in there. We'll get him back on. I stand with Robert Forst. Investor vote, yes. Principles over party. Guys, we talk about these things all the time. We've seen this local area, New York 19, seen some, I don't want to call it malfeasance, but they saw the power of the Republican Party and what the Republican Party can do that may or may not be appropriate. And guys, we'll find out over time, but we don't like what we've seen. And so, Dr. Mark, once again, man, I just want to say how much I appreciate this conversation, how much fun I have talking to you.
Oh, I have so much fun talking to you, Tim.
All right, cool, man. We'll do it again, man. I a lot of times I could do the show every night, but I gotta.
You didn't tell your viewers where we ran into each other in person a couple weeks ago.
Oh,
right?
That's right. You tell them.
Well, we were in Albany protesting the nursing home fiasco on the day that there were the hearings to investigate why Andrew Cuomo returned all those patients to nursing homes, and a lot of people died as a result of it. Anyway, there was a protest that was partly Libertarian sponsored.
A lot of Libertarians
in Albany at the Capitol to protest that, and I drove there. And Tim drove there, and we had a fun time.
Yeah, David Stange did a lot of. He's the chairman of. Drawing a blank with the name, but he did a lot of the organizing of that. He helped put that together. So the Libertarian influence was definitely there. There were a lot of great speakers. There was a lot of great energy. And as you can see, I think human beings are having an impact on this. Potentially Cuomo is going to get investigated. It's not just politics what he did. He made decisions based on money, and he had opportunities to avoid those decisions. There's several thousand deaths that he should at least be investigated for, guys, and I'm not joking.
People are celebrating him, and he's got the greatest PR racket going on. I mean, people are upset with Sweden because they've got like 580 deaths per 100,000, or is that per million? I think that's per million, 580 per million from this COVID.
That sounds right.
And yet, New York State has almost twice as many per million people. And somehow Cuomo is coming off as having done so much better job of saving the population. Whereas the death rate per million people is like twice in New York State what it was in Sweden. How can anybody get away with claiming that they did such a great job in managing?
I'm telling you, it's the media. They do it on purpose because we react, and the people that are in favor of Cuomo react to news stories like that. And it's desperation for ad revenue, millipennies for clicks, and it's embarrassing. It's part of the destructive nature of politics in our modern society. I feel like they're anti-Trump, pro-Cuomo for the same reason, okay? That it stimulates people into action that they can then turn into millipennies and advertising revenue. Maybe I'm crazy, but I don't think I am. Not on that anyway. I may be crazy, but not on that. All right, guys, we're heading down there. I did call Rand Paul, by the way, to thank him for his support for upstate New York. It was cute. I got an answering machine, man. All right, Dr. Mark, once again, thank you very much. Hang out for a second. I will just, chit chat a little bit. And guys, thank you, all of you. I appreciate the likes, the shares, the comments, all that stuff. I reshared my donor box link. If you can donate $5, $10, $20, $3,800.
Help this guy. He's going to make a difference.
Why not, man? I'm making an impact.
Miracle if he gets into the state senate, but we really, really do need someone like that. Someone that.
Listen, I'm having impact though, brother. I'm telling you, people are they like what we say, what the Libertarian Party is working towards. They like it. All right, guys. Good night.